Hello, readers! Have you ever wondered what it would be like to see ghosts? Not the spooky kind, but everyday spirits with their own stories and, surprisingly, a love for coffee. In The Ghost Rules, author Adam Rosenbaum introduces us to 12-year-old Elwood McGee, who discovers he can see and interact with ghosts. This unexpected ability leads him into a world filled with humor, heart, and a few drooling spirits.
Some ghosts have it together, especially the fresh ones who've been dead less than a decade. They stick to the rules and keep clear of the living. They spend their days doing, well, something. I don't exactly know their daily routines, believe it or not. I do know there's a lot of staring at old photos and a frightening amount of mumbling about coffee. Side note, the dead seem to miss coffee more than anything else. I've seen them gather around a coffee maker, rocking back and forth and chanting quietly, like it was some kind of caffeine idol. The real problem is the older ghosts. They're either too far gone to care about the rules, or they're so old they've forgotten them completely. The old ones are easy to spot. They move slower and are much more blobby, and their drool, holy smokes, ghost drool from an old one is the most disgusting thing in the world. It's this thick, bluish, purplish glob that hangs down from their mouths, sometimes all the way to their feet. When they turn their heads, it flings like a slow-mo, slimy shower. Ever felt something wet hit you when you were nowhere near water? Ghost drool. And before you ask, yes, I'm going to tell you the ghost rules, at least the ones I've figured out so far. Just keep in mind that getting info out of the dead isn't easy. Most of them can only moan, and if they do talk, it's mumbling nonsensical threats to some poor cat. Yes, there are plenty who can still form actual sentences, but they aren't itching to explain the ways of the afterlife. Plus, they're jealous that we're still breathing and smelling and tasting and drinking mocha lattes.
That was a glimpse into the world Adam has created. Today, he joins me to discuss how he blended the supernatural with the everyday, crafting a story that's both entertaining and thought-provoking for young readers. I'm Anisha Jeffries, and this is Reading in the Middle. Stay with us. Hi, Adam. Welcome to Reading in the Middle. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
So, The Ghost Rules is your debut novel. Congratulations.
Yes.
You're welcome. What was it like to see your first book out in the world?
It is so wonderful and bizarre, and every time I see it, like on a bookstore bookshelf or in a library, like I hope it never gets old because it's so fun now seeing it and watching strangers discover it. Because like friends and family, they're gonna read it, or at least pretend to read it. They'll have it in their house. But when people that I've never met are finding it at their library or their bookstore, that's the absolute best. And I hope that never gets old.
It won't. Believe me, it won't get old. Like I know, I'm not a writer, so. But that's great. Could you tell us a little bit about the Ghost Rules for our listeners?
Absolutely. So this is a middle grade book, obviously, which is what you like just as much as I do. So this is a book about a boy named Elwood, and he lives in Nashville with his parents and older brother. And his older brother, Noah, passes away. He dies in that tragic accident, and Elwood blames himself for what happens. And so in their grief, the family moves to a small town in Tennessee, which is where I'm from, to the house where Elwood's mom grew up. And within a day of being there, Elwood sees the ghost of his grandfather. And he freaks out, obviously, because he's seeing a ghost for the first time. And then he discovers that he doesn't just see the ghost of his grandfather, he sees all ghosts. But these ghosts in my story aren't like scary ghosts. This isn't a scary ghost story. These ghosts they're goofy, they're funny, they're forgetful, they drool a lot, they like coffee. So these ghosts are, they're not the scary type. Yeah, exactly. They love coffee. And so Elwood, with the help of two girls that live on his new street in this small town, kind of goes on a mission to figure out, why do I see ghosts? And then he figures out, wait a second, my brother is dead and I can see dead people. So then they shift their goal to trying to find the ghost of Elwood's brother Noah so he can talk to him one last time. So it's mostly a funny ghost story, lots of like comedic elements, but there's also a little bit of pulling the heartstrings with Elwood looking for his brother.
It's a wonderful story.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, your main character, Elwood, like you mentioned, he's dealing with a lot. A new school, family tragedy, then the sudden ability to see ghosts. Where did you get the idea for the ghost rules? Where did that come from?
Okay, so way back in 2010, I was living in Los Angeles trying to become a screenwriter at the time. So all I was doing was writing scripts, like feature-length scripts, short films, TV pilots, and I was writing everything, like dramas and comedies and action thrillers, just trying to figure out like what I wanted to do and what kind of writer I wanted to be. And I was sitting in my living room alone, and across the living room, nobody else was at home, a picture frame just fell over, just spontaneously fell over. And I just thought I laughed thinking to myself, what if it was a ghost, but it was a clumsy ghost that bumped into the end table on his way to the refrigerator to see what was inside? And it just made me laugh. And I just thought, like, what if ghosts were like clumsy and like kind of goofy and not very smart? And so I just sat down and I wrote the first chapter of the Ghost Rules right there. I'd never written anything, like I'd never written prose. Everything I'd written up to that point was screenplays. And so I wrote the first chapter, the Ghost Rules, which is like 90% of what the finished version in the book right now is. But I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, I don't write books. Like, what is this like middle grade kids thing? I write scripts. So I just put it away. For 10 years, I put it away because I didn't know what to do with it. And then in 2020, when we were all trapped in our houses, I needed a creative outlet. And I joined a writer's group over Zoom. And they were like, bring in something you're proud of. And I was like, well, I have this thing. And so I bust out the first chapter of the Ghost Rules and I read it to this writer's group over Zoom. And they laughed at it. And I was like, oh, maybe there's something here. Like maybe I should explore this. So in 2020, I started writing the whole thing and I fleshed it out, and I spent the whole year writing in the Ghost Rules in 2020.
Wow, does that seem like a long ago, 2020, and now we're in 2025?
It does. It does feel like a long time ago.
I have another question. If you, like you mentioned, the picture frame falling down, if you found out that you could see ghosts like Elwood, would you totally be cool with it, or would you be running for the hills?
That's a really good question. So I do a lot of school visits, which is like my favorite thing in the world, like talking to elementary and middle school kids about writing and everything. And inevitably, every time we do a Q&A, one kid will raise his hand, do you believe in ghosts? And I always tell them, like, I don't believe in ghosts, but only because I haven't seen one before. So they have not asked me what I would do if I did see one. I think I would freak out because, I think it would, if they were like the ghosts in the Ghost Rules, I think I would get used to it pretty quickly and then probably just be annoyed like Elwood is.
Right, like if it was Casper, you'd be okay, but if it was like another type of ghost, it'd be like,
Exactly. Yeah, no poltergeist, please.
What was the most exciting and the challenging part of writing your first book?
Wow, I loved doing it because when I was writing it, I had no expectations of being here. Like when I was writing it, I just was like, I just needed a creative outlet in 2020. I needed something to do with my brain. And so I just was kind of doing it for fun. And it wasn't until like I would bring in chapters every couple weeks to this writing group and read it. And I would hear them laugh at the funny parts and respond emotionally to the more emotional parts. And I just thought like, maybe there really is something here. So I think the most exciting part for me was reading my words out loud and hearing audience respond to them like I wanted them to. And that was just, that's really fun as a writer to know that like, okay, like my words they're working how I want them to, because you never really know. So that's one piece of advice I always give writers at any stage is read your words out loud in front of multiple people. And you hear your words in a different way and you experience them through the other people's eyes. And I feel like you grow a lot as a writer that way.
You sure do. I believe that. And that sounds inspirational as well because you with that balance between, funny and there are some parts that are touching and sad, but your ghosts aren't scary. They're actually kind of awkward.
Yeah.
They forget to float through walls. They spill their coffee and they have their own weird habits. Why did you decide to make ghosts funny instead of terrifying?
I think I mean, I've seen and read a million terrifying ghost stories, and it just, I think the thing that attracted me to the idea was just like, oh, this is a little different. This is something that I haven't seen that much of before, especially when I was writing it for the first time. And so I was just like, well, it made me laugh, and it kind of was fun. So I just threw myself into it, and in that way, just because I hadn't really seen it before.
Because in your book, ghosts have specific rules. How did you come up with these ghost rules? And did any of them change while you were writing?
Yeah, good question. So in that moment back in 2010, when I just like the first chapter just exploded out of me, I just kind of like, I took all the tropes of normal ghost stories, and I thought like, okay, there's probably some rules to this world, and so I thought like, yeah, this character Elwood, he would probably be interested in defining the rules. So I just kind of threw a few out there, and I can't remember how many there are. There's 5 or 6 maybe, and all but one were from that very first day that I wrote it, when the words just exploded out of me. I had to add an additional one, and I can't remember which one it is. I should go back and look through emails, but my editor at Holiday House was like, hey, we should probably define this one thing. So I was like, yeah, I'll add one more in. But what was interesting is it did give me kind of a canvas to work with for the rest of the book of like, here's the rules of this world and I can't deviate from them. And I have some ghosts like throughout the book that they kind of add to the rules a little bit, but they never break the rules. So it was nice to have kind of some restrictions to work with, to know that like, okay, I have to stick to these things. I can't break those rules, or, the whole story falls apart.
Yeah, well, even though Ghost Rules is funny, at its heart, it's really about Elwood missing his brother, right? How did you balance humor with a story that also deals with grief? Because it's a fine line, right?
Totally. It is a fine line. And that was probably the hardest part with writing it, is making sure that I never wanted to go too far to either side. I never wanted it to be too silly and slapsticky, and I never wanted it to be too heavy. Because I just think the books that I grew up reading, the books that I still love reading middle grade, the ones that I love reading now, they're the ones that kind of walk that line. And so I really tried really hard to be as honest and authentic as possible with the more emotional parts. But before it got too like sad and sappy, I would throw in a joke to kind of alleviate the tension, just to show kids, it's okay to laugh. And I'm not gonna, this isn't gonna be one of those books where it's just like, hitting you over the head with heaviness and too much emotional content. They can still laugh, and hopefully they can also see themselves in Elwood a little bit. Cause I think every kid, especially coming out of the COVID years, I think every kid has experienced loss to some extent. And maybe it's not that their sibling died or their grandparent died. Maybe it's just that they really struggled during COVID, or maybe it's that they lost their best friend who moved away, or maybe it's as simple as like they were trying really hard on a class project and they got a bad grade on it, and they froze up and it didn't work. Every kid has experienced some kind of loss. So I just was hoping that they could see themselves through Elwood. And I felt like the best way to do that was walk that line between the humor and the more emotional part.
Yeah, because Elwood goes through this journey of figuring out like what to do with his ghost seeing ability, right? Did you always know how his story would end, or did it surprise you while you were writing?
So I think some of the most fun things as a writer is when I'm surprised by a character or by something that happens. I actually knew the ending pretty early on. I knew how I wanted it to end. I knew, like, I had a target that I was aiming at. but how to get there, I didn't really know. When I was doing screenwriting back in LA, everything I did was really, really well outlined. I thought through everything in advance, just made sure everything was organized and outlined. And this was one of the first times where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get there. I had a couple of things that I was like, I think I'd like to have an old movie theater, like an old rundown movie theater. And I'd like some characters there. I think I would like to have a scene, a hidden room in a school library. Ooh. And so I had like these moments that I knew I wanted to hit throughout the book, but I just wasn't totally sure how I was going to get from moment to moment. So that was the surprising part that was really, really fun.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question. So what books turned you into a writer? Any childhood favorites that still stick with you?
Yes. Oh, I just had it on my desk, but I put it away. So one of my favorite books of all time is a book that I read and reread as a kid, The Westing Game.
Yes.
On Raskin. And so I have 4 kids, and my 10-year-old and I were at the library the other day, and he was asking the librarian, like, I like mysteries, whatever. And she was like, have you ever heard of The Westing Game? And I was like, oh, that's my favorite book. And so I made him read it last week, and he turned it in a couple nights ago. He gave it back to me and he said, Dad, this is in my top 5. And I was like, yes, like I felt so successful as a parent, because that book meant so much to me, and I love it still and reread it. Another book so that was a book when I was a kid that really meant a lot to me. As I got older and started thinking about writing books, Rebecca Stead's When You Reach Me, like, kind of knocked me over, just really floored me. I had never heard of Rebecca Stead. This was 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't know who Rebecca Stead was. I didn't read a ton of middle grade. I read some as an adult, but not a ton. And I was looking at my library through the Newbery Award winners, and I just saw it and thought, hey, I'll give this a shot. Knew nothing about it. And within like the first page, I was like, this is for me. Like, I knew immediately. And that's probably the book that I recommend the most, When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead. It's so, so good.
It sure is. And both books that you mentioned are Newbery Award-winning titles.
Yeah, sure.
So those are highly recommended books. And teachers, educators, they know those books by heart because especially me, I recommend all of those books. So yes, those are wonderful books. Also, side note, I read that you're on the hunt for the perfect blueberry donut. Have you found it yet? Or are you still searching?
I'm always searching. I feel like there's always got to be a better one. There's a donut shop in Nashville that's right around the corner from one of my favorite bookstores, Parnassus Books in Nashville.
And Patchett.
Exactly, yeah. So that's one of my very favorite stores that I've ever been to anywhere, but it's awesome that it's in Nashville, and there's a little donut store right around the corner from it, and they have just this magical blueberry donut. So right now that's probably my favorite, but I'm always on the search. I figure there's got to be a better one out there somewhere.
Yes, as always, right? Donuts are so great.
I know it. Exactly.
So now it's time for our rapid fire questions, Adam.
Okay.
And the first thing that pops into your head, just your answer. There's no right or wrong. If you could haunt any place as a ghost, where would it be?
Gosh, my first thought is a museum, like an art museum or the Museum of Natural History.
Favorite fictional ghost of all time?
Fictional ghost. I mean, the Christmas Carol ghosts are pretty high up there. I like them a lot. That's such a hard question. I'm going to stick with Christmas Carol.
Awesome. If the Ghost Rules had a theme song, what would it be?
My goodness, I love that. I've never had that question. That's amazing. I think it would sound a lot like the cartoons from the 80s and 90s that I grew up on, like the TV shows like DuckTales and Gummy Bears, and I think it would be in that vein probably.
Wonderful. What's one book you think everyone should read at least once?
One book. Okay, I already recommended The Westing Game and When You Reach Me. Here's a book that I just finished that I'm going to start recommending to everyone to read is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness.
Yeah.
It's just finished it yesterday, finished it in my living room and was just weeping by the end. It absolutely floored me. Wonderful, wonderful book.
You're right. That is a wonderful book. Oh my goodness. So that was great. Thank you for answering those questions. I know some of them were but you
No,
answered them all great.
I feel like I wanna spend like 10 minutes thinking about who my favorite fictional ghost is. I feel like there's so many I could have come up with.
So, Adam, what's next for you? Are there more ghostly or non-ghostly books on the horizon?
There are no ghostly books on the horizon, although I would love to. I'd love to come back to this world someday. I think it would all depend on, how many millions of kids discover the ghost rules, but I do love those characters. But next for me, I'm staying in the middle grade world. I have a couple of things I can't quite talk about yet that I'm almost able to talk about. Couple of things coming up that I'm so excited about that are going to be really, really fun. They're in the middle grade world. They're in the same vein of funny and exciting with some elements of history mixed in. So I'm really excited and can't wait to unveil those to the world.
I can't wait as well. Where can listeners find more about you and the ghost rules, Adam?
So you can find me on Instagram, on Threads. I am at Rosenbaum Writes. I have a website, adamrosenbaumwrites.com, where I have a little contact board. Anybody can reach out to me. I love hearing from readers of all ages. I love it when parents email me or message me and tell me, hey, my kid was up all night reading and it's their favorite book of all time, like anything like that. I love it. So if you're a parent of a kid and your kid falls in love with a book, don't ever feel weird about reaching out to the author, because it's the greatest thing in the world when a parent tells us, like, hey, my kid was supposed to be asleep and they were reading your book all night. That's the.
So you mentioned also that you do school visits, which I
Yes.
bet is a lot of fun. What kind of, besides ghosts, what other kind of questions do young people ask you related to the ghost rules? Is there anything that just one question that just like caught you off guard, or did you share that with us?
Yeah, like I said, school visits are the absolute best. And I've talked to kids as young as first grade, all the way up through high school. I feel like 4th through 7th grade seems to be the sweet spot for the ghost rules. And I mean, I get all kinds of, you probably know the kinds of questions that the kids can come up with. There's always the how much money do you make question that comes up. There's always something about if I believe in ghosts. I mean, I get such weird questions like, hey, do you know Stephen King? I'm like, well, first of all, you shouldn't be reading Stephen King when you're in 4th grade. And second of all, no, not all authors just automatically know each other. Although I wish I did. Yeah, I mean, just such, I need to start writing down like the more bizarre questions. Normally I try to deflect pretty quickly if they're getting too bizarre. But I mean, they come up with the sweetest questions about writing, and like, how do you know if something you write is any good? And what's the best way to finish what you're working on? And like the most like thoughtful, astute questions coming from these elementary school kids that you can just tell, like, there's usually one or two in a crowd where I'm like, okay, you're a writer. Like, you're already thinking like a writer. So stuff like that's very fun and exciting.
My goodness, Adam, this has just been wonderful. I want to thank you again for this interview and being on Reading in the Middle. It was so much fun. And listeners, you must read The Ghost Rules. It's a wonderful book. It's funny. It has heart. It is just an amazing debut novel by Adam, and you're going to love it. Teachers, you will love it. And we have it at our library, so I already know that this is a book I'm definitely recommending. It's high on my list. And Adam, just thank you again for being here and sharing your process and your work with our listeners.
Absolutely. That means so much coming from you. That means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome.
And that wraps up our conversation with Adam Rosenbaum, author of The Ghost Rules. The clip that I played earlier was narrated by Matt Godfrey. If you're intrigued by a story that combines ghostly adventures with heartfelt moments, consider picking up a copy. You will enjoy it. It's a journey that reminds us of the importance of empathy, understanding, and the unexpected friendships that can change our lives. Thank you for joining us on Reading in the Middle, where we explore the stories that resonate with young readers. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Your feedback
helps us continue bringing these captivating narratives to light. Until next time, keep reading, keep imagining, and remember, every story has its own set of rules. Bye.